appearing in this presentation is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as advice of any kind, including without limitation, legal, investment, or accounting or investment advice. Now, with no further ado, I am pleased to introduce your moderator for this webcast, Chris Denning with Moss Adams. Chris, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Deanna. And I'd like to thank everybody for taking time out of your day to tune in and listen to our panel. I think we've got a lot of really good information here. Just kind of an informational purpose. I am with Moss Adams. We are the largest public accounting firm, advisory firm based west of the Mississippi. We've been around for over 100 years. I haven't been there the whole time, but I have been at Moss Adams for a little over 30 years. I started there out of college. I'm a partner on the assurance side in our San Jose office, and I spent about 10 years running at the firm level our consumer products manufacturing group, and now I'm really focused more just on manufacturing, consumer products, retail, and food and beverage companies, primarily in the San Jose region. So I have spent a lot of time this last year focused on PPP and helping a lot of our clients with cash flow issues. So that's kind of how I got involved with this part of it. We're partnering with the Newport board group, and they are a firm that has helped a lot of our clients over the years. We're working with their executive teams with a lot of strategic and business issues. This is the second part in a series of presentations that we're doing. The first one was on leadership, and that one is available. We're recording all the sessions so that you can watch them at your leisure if you missed them. The next one, and these are all about a week apart other than Thanksgiving, we've got a little break in there, is go-to-market product and sales strategies. The next one after that is going to be digital transformation and customer experience, then one on supply chain management, and then the last one is going to be preparing your company for acquisition. I'm really excited about that one because it's really looking forward to determine how to build value in your business based on likely exit scenarios that you may choose in the future. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to go ahead and introduce themselves. And Michael, if you could maybe just give a little bit more information on the Newport board group, appreciate that too. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Chris. Welcome everybody today. I know it's hard to pull away from the television at times, but we appreciate everyone being on the webcast today. I'm Mike Evans. I'm CFO and Managing Director of Northern California of the Newport Board Group. We're 50 partners around the country, and we focus on middle market companies, helping them improve performance and also position for growth and capital transactions, which may include acquisitions, buy and sell side, as well as mergers and financings. My background is started with a law firm in Minneapolis, moved to San Francisco as the weather was a little bit colder than California, and was with Ernst & Young for 35 years, and then joined the Newport Board Group about 8 years ago in San Francisco office. And we work with Moss Adams, work very well in terms of partnering on clients to make sure that they're receiving and positioning for growth.
Chris, it looked like you were on mute. Can you repeat what you just
John,
said?
do you want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, my name is John Horner. I'm a director for Moss Adams in the restructuring group. I'm a CPA by training, and spent most of my career in private accounting in the controller and CFO positions, among others, and spent the last several years, about the last 7 years, in restructuring. It's been very interesting and very enjoyable. And that would be it for me.
All right, thanks, John. James?
Thanks, Chris. James Rothenberger here. Good morning, everybody. I'm a partner with Moss Adams Capital, assisting companies with raising capital, debt or equity, helping them prepare for an acquisition or selling their business. And been doing this for, it's my 7th year at Moss Adams, and been involved in the M&A industry for 12, 13 years now, originally in private equity, and now with Moss Adams Capital. So looking forward.
Great, thanks, James. So going into our first question I'm going to pose to the panelists here, we do have a polling question. So Deanna, if you can bring up that first polling question. We're hopeful to be able to give you guys some feedback as we go through this, to be able to have some feel for how the group is weathering the different issues that we're going to be facing. So the first question we're wanting is how's the pandemic really impacting your business? So if you can go ahead and select your choice there. And we'll share the poll results at the end. I know a lot of the clients that I work with are always interested in how other companies are being impacted by this, and whether they're on their own or not. And this will help guide some of the discussion here too in the first question that we're going to pose to the panelists. So we'll give us another probably less than a minute here to get as many responses as we can. And it looks like we're about 80% done at this point. So Deanna, do you want to pull up those poll results? And this is going to lead us into our first question. And so, just looking at the poll results, it's pretty evenly dispersed. Most of the participants on the call today are somewhat worse, which is kind of what we're seeing in our clients. There are a few that are up, a few that are about the same, but most of them are really figuring out how to try and navigate through this. So the first question I have is two parts. So the first part would be, are there some effective strategies to immediately get increases in cash flow? And then as a follow-on to that, companies do have a multitudes of expenses and cash flow areas impacting their business, and many of those are fixed costs or generally deemed to be essential to operations of their customers. What are best practices to determine where to start reducing or managing cash flows? And I think we'll start with Mike on this question.
Thanks, Chris. I think first thing to look at is where are we in the cycle? And I think there is hope that we had a V-shaped recovery, but I think that's been given up, and it's more of a W-shaped recovery. And we're probably at the top of the W. And I say that because we see increasing COVID cases. We see stimulus packages not being put in place like they were in the first part of COVID. So I think it's really important to position for a downturn. Not sure how, a second downturn. Not sure how deep that's going to be. But irrespective of that, there are several things that I think companies should be doing. And really, these are very simple things to do and implement, but can have a pretty significant effect. And it's all around what's called the cash conversion cycle, which is how effectively and how quickly you can collect cash from customers and defer paying cash out to others, vendors, suppliers, and so forth. And it can be really meaningful cash because the cash you save is really a permanent deferral. I'll give a couple examples. But the first thing you can do is to make sure that all of your clients are on electronic payments. And why is that? Because if you're getting paid by your customers by check, it takes time for the customer to draft the check, to put the check in the, get the check signed, to put the check in the mail. And that takes longer than it used to. For you to cash the check and deposit the check. So effectively, by moving customers to ACH, you can probably save 7 days in the cash conversion cycle. On the other side of that is paying your vendors. Obviously, if you pay your vendors by check versus ACH, that's another 7 days. And the other thing that is something that's very easy to do, but a lot of companies do not do it, and I'll give a really good example of it that I think it's a good example, is to look how quickly you're paying your vendors. We had a client that was a very large home builder, and we asked them, we did a little benchmarking study. It took just a matter of an hour or two, frankly, across their industry. And we asked it was a potential client at the time, we ended up getting them as a client for how quickly you paid your subcontractors. And they said, well, we were paying our subcontractors in 24 days. And we asked the CEO, are you aware that your competitors are paying your subcontractors in 24 days or in 45 days? The savings of moving from that 24 to something around 40 days was literally tens of millions of dollars of extra cash flow. This was a large home builder. But even for a small company, by combining all of these together, if you've got $24 million of revenue and you move your days by 14 days, that becomes $1 million of extra cash flow. So that's the easiest thing to do. The second thing I would suggest is your collections. We had a client, a good-sized client, 35 million revenue, that didn't call on collections until 60 days after the bill was sent out. And, we asked them why they were so long. And the reason is, well, we don't want to upset our customers. Well, we moved that, so they start calling now within 30 days. And our customers have said, geez, why didn't you do this before? We frankly were paying you last because we knew you'd never call. That has a very significant effect on cash flow, and the customers were okay with it. So those are some simple things to do. There's more complex cash flow planning and so forth, but COVID, recession or not, I think it's something that every company should look at, is their cash conversion cycle, and very simple solutions to improve your cash position.
On to the cash planning.
Yeah, but Mike stole a little bit of my thunder there, but just to reiterate, collections. I'm a little more aggressive than that. I suggest you're reaching out to your client within a week just to say, hey, did you get the invoice? Is there anything wrong? Did we do something wrong? Not, why are you not paying us, but did we do something wrong? And you become the squeaky wheel, so to speak, without being annoying. If there are assets lying around, I had a client late last year who had lots of fixed assets, and I say fixed assets. They had lots of rolling stock, yellow iron in the oil field, and vehicles that they weren't using, and it was literally just piles of cash lying around their yard. You can sell unused assets if you take deposits on new sales. Bump that up a bit just to get cash in sooner. And you can also identify and talk to critical vendors. Explain your situation a little bit. Just be honest with them. I wouldn't paint a dire picture, but be honest with them and ask for a little bit better terms in the short term, for the next 6 months to a year. And 9 times out of 10, I've found that if you are a good customer to begin with, they're going to agree wholeheartedly because they do not want to lose your business. And, much like Mike said, push your non-critical vendors. Just stretch your payment terms a bit. It will help. But, your critical vendors, I wouldn't do that without talking to them first, because those are the vendors that you have to absolutely have to, continue operating. Well, these are all very simple. And like Mike said, there's you can get much more complicated with it. But initially, these are great first steps to take.
All right, thanks, John. I'm going to ask Deanna to pull up our second polling question here, because one of the things that we run into when we're trying to assess how to manage our business is what kind of data do we have. So the next polling question that we have is related to that, and how would you rate the quality of the data available for you to make decisions? Is it really good and timely? Is it really good but not that timely? Is it timely but not that good? Or is it not really good and not timely at all? So just trying to get a feel for where the audience is as far as the information that they have available to them. And I'm going to ask the panelists, probably the same ones here, starting again with Mike, to weigh in on what can you do to get better data and to make improvements quickly with respect to giving executives the information that they can use to really start down this process of understanding where to address the cash flows.
Chris, thanks. I think there's three things. One is benchmarking, as I mentioned before, your company against your industry and your competitors, and find out where you may be the exception, positive or negative, and focus on those areas. So for example, we talked about vendors. If you're paying them a lot faster than your industry competition, that's a good thing to know. The second thing, and benchmarking information is pretty easy to get. There's all kinds of services that allow you to look at your competitors on a no-names basis. And it's assembled primarily from tax returns. So it's a lot of good sources of benchmarking information. The second thing is to really relook at spending your money. And I'll just give an example of that. We looked closely and pulled data up on insurance policies. So we thought we were a little out of whack on one. We put it out for bid. We saved $80,000 immediately, and we actually got better insurance. And the third one is in any ERP accounting system, your data can be as old as 45 days. If you're getting your reports 15 days after the end of the month, then some of that data is 45 days old. So putting in what's called a KPI dashboard, where you're able to pull up information daily or a moment or instantly on collections and cash positions and so forth, can be a great and fairly inexpensive solution to getting your data too late to really make any changes and make any decisions based on the fact that it's well over a month old. So I think those are three areas that data comes into play, that a little bit of time assembling data, looking at data, comparing it to other companies, and it's like I mentioned on insurance, $80,000 took about a 5-minute phone call to do. So a lot of good solutions can come from learning what you're doing versus what your competitors are doing.
All right, thanks, Mike. Anyone have any additional things to add into that?
Yeah, the quality and timing of data is it's very important. One of the things, without repeating things that Mike has said, is take a look at your staffing in your finance and accounting department. Is your controller or CFO, are they performing items that somebody else should be performing because they don't have a good enough staff or a big enough staff? That would be really easy to bring in temp help or bring in more consultants to free them up to actually do more of what they should be doing. The dashboard or the KPIs, that's a quick reference that you can look at daily or weekly, however often that you determine that you need that, to see how you're performing against what you think you're doing. And, and also very importantly is if you don't already have a cash flow projection, build one. This will be something your CFO probably wants to do, but may not have the time. But it will allow you to predict times of shortfalls, and hopefully it's far enough out into the future that you can say, okay, we have X number of weeks to rectify this situation by putting off payments or cutting or whatever the solution may be. The cash flow is very, very important.
Okay, thanks, John. Since we're talking about kind of cash, and I know a lot of companies have obtained PPP loans. So Deanna, I'm going to ask you to put up our next polling question, which is related to that. And it's a little bit more than just did you get a PPP loan. What we're trying to do is get a feel for what companies have already applied for the forgiveness. Do you expect to get full forgiveness? And we'll share the results with everybody from this, because I think it's an area that we're seeing a lot of our clients really focused on right now, which is trying to kind of understand this scenario. So I have spent a lot of time in the PPP loan area over the last 6 months, working with our clients and other partners that we work with. And now we're starting to see a lot of our clients start the forgiveness process. And the advice I'd have for you there is to really make sure that you've got good documentation for the costs, that you spent some time on the SBA website to read through the Q&A. I think the most recent update is around the beginning of October. There's a little over 50 questions there that they went through. So it does provide a lot of guidance as far as clarity on the types of expenses that are allowable. We've, at least I've recommended to clients to, really focus first on the areas where it's easiest to get the documentation. And generally that's going to be in the payroll area, and maybe with some of the rents. Those are typically easier to pull up than a lot of utility bills and other areas there. So, just looking at the poll results, it's good. It looks like, of the people that did get loans, there was about, 35% that did not. And the others have actually started the forgiveness process already. So, that's good that you're on board with that, because it can take a little bit of time to get through that process. And, when you look at that, Mike talked a little bit earlier about some of the stimulus programs that are out there. And if we go into another downturn, it's hard to really say, what's going to be available. And, maybe I'll open this up to any of the panelists here, just as far as, what are you seeing in the banking sector right now with companies you work with as far as access to, to loans? My experience has been is that unlike the 2008 downturn, the banks actually have a lot of money to lend. But they're pretty focused on making sure that the quality of the loan is good and that they're going to be able to be paid back. So that's where these cash flow projections can also be really beneficial, to be able to work with your bankers to be able to really understand where your needs are and when you're going to need the money. So I'll open it up to the panel here for a minute.
Chris, we just finished the financing, and I think you're right. The banks have a lot of money. They'll actually have a lot more money once the PPP is forgiven, because it's really the bank's money that went to the company, and the banks will get that capital back. So they'll be flush with capital, but they're being very selective. They're very aggressive when it's a solid company. And we just financed commercial real estate with one of our clients, and they got a much lower interest rate. Their 10-year loan in the bank was extremely aggressive. And it took a lot less time to do a major facility than it did the last time I financed my own home loan. So I think for good quality credits, they're very aggressive. They're hesitant from what I've seen. If you're a company and you're affected by COVID and the recession, and you're having trouble, I do think there's going to be more relief from the government. The PPP program, frankly, was, despite some criticism, was highly successful as compared to the Main Street Loan Program, which is also available. So I would hope, and I would think that in the next round of stimulus, and I know there's been discussion about it, to have a second PPP type loan process. And obviously I encourage everybody to look at that. And it's the cheapest money you can get.
Yeah. Okay. Well, the next question I'm going to bring up here, we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening on the M&A side, because I know there's a lot of opportunities out there. Anytime there's adversity, there's challenges, but there's also opportunities that are surrounded with that. And for the next polling question, Deanna, if you could bring that up, what we're looking at is, what are you expecting over the next 18 months, with your business? Are you expecting it to grow? Are you expecting it to stay about even? And how do you kind of see that happening? Are you looking at acquisitions? Are you looking at internal growth? So give this a minute. But maybe going into this as we're bringing up the polling results, and probably have Mike and James kind of focus on this question. How do companies assess what are the best strategies for growth? When do you have good opportunities for acquisitions versus just expansion of your own business? And then as a follow-on to that, what's out there currently? What trends are you seeing as far as the ability to finance some of these deals if you are looking to do acquisitions? So, maybe this time we'll start with James. Do you want to give that a shot?
Absolutely. It's a great question. Every company has been impacted by COVID and the resulting recession here. And like all recessions, there are pockets in the economy that are performing very well and pockets that are underperforming or performing very poorly. And companies evaluate what it is that they do well already and how that skill set can be applied to an adjacent end market that is performing well today and for the next few years. And if a company assesses sort of the spin wheel of potential end markets for its products or services, what does the company do well, and which end market can be most easily or with little investment be transportable into that new adjacent end market? A few analogies. A very simple one, blood labs that have shifted 80% of their business to COVID testing. That change requires very little investment. It's something that they already do very well. It applies a skill set they do very well. Another example would be building wrapper manufacturers and distributors, the moisture protection wrap that goes around buildings. We have a client that has been focused on the commercial end markets, and they've limited experience in single family housing and hired on an individual, and they're working on that channel given the growth in single family housing. Very transportable. It's the same product. It's just a different end market with a little bit of a different application. And so what will already do well, and how can that skill set be applied to adjacent end markets that are performing well in this economy? And the last thing I would add there, Chris, is, and folks, is that it also mean establishing a joint venture, a partnership, acquiring another business to help get there faster. There is a lot more of that happening this year than in the past 10 years. And, we're involved in a number of different transactions, but the transactions look a little bit different this year, and there's more openness to joint ventures and working with other companies that have different skill sets so that you can get there faster. And this could be a means of a potential growth strategy, is what partners are around you that'll help you get to those new end markets faster.
Hey, James, one question that I have on that is, for companies that are thinking of expanding or maybe potentially doing an acquisition, what are the markets like, and what's available as far as, to companies to be able to fund, that growth?
In terms of the debt capital markets and equity capital markets? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I echo Mike's comments completely here. the short answer is you have a lot of options if you're in an end market that's performing very well. Just said, highly competitive. Essentially, nothing's changed there. Valuations are high. Lending capacity is strong. But if you're in an end market that has any sort of exposure to COVID, be it mild or significant, agree completely that the banks have pulled back. And what's certainly different this time around than in 2008 and 2000, you said, Chris, the banks have cash. They're sitting on record levels of deposits, but their willingness to lend on a debt to EBITDA basis or a debt to collateral basis, it's come down a little bit this year. And so companies consequently have had to look towards other pockets, Main Street lending, PPP, EIDL, mezzanine financing is available, are open to that type of structure. And interestingly, more private equity funds interested in minority equity investing. Again, the fundamentals have to line up there, but it's worth exploring all options in this environment. And again, going back to the growth strategy, the more you can address moving into end markets that are performing well and create a tangible growth opportunity there, it's going to broaden your options from a capital markets perspective.
Thanks, James.
Chris, I might add that was exactly on point. What's interesting, there's been a lot of new sources of capital that have been added or expanded since the COVID started. James mentioned in capital, and there's what that is growth capital. It's pretty high interest rate, but it's available through some of the business development corporations. We have a pretty small client who's actually bootstrapping going public through what's called a special purpose acquisition corporation. Last week, the SEC expanded the size of Reg D offerings and crowdfunding up to 5 million. So it's interesting that there's a lot of, and there's distressed asset companies, which you may not want to sell to, but you may look to borrow money from them. I think Brookfield did a fund. But there's new sources of capital that are expanding to take advantage of companies that may be struggling, but also to reposition companies in the marketplace. Brooks Brothers was just acquired, a number of the clothing companies similarly. So what is interesting is during this time of crisis and economic distress, new capital sources are emerging that shouldn't be overlooked.
Okay, yeah, thanks. And that kind of leads us into the next kind of, I guess, the follow-on topic to that, which is, and this would be another polling question, for the attendees. And by the way, all of your polling results are very, they're confidential. We're not sharing those with anyone as far as who answered what here. So, would you consider an exit event in the next 18 months? And just trying to get a temperature for the group here as far as, some people may have already been thinking about that. Others might if they get the right deal, and others really just don't have an intent. So I'm going to ask James again to start on this one with respect to the M&A markets. From what you read out there, there's about $1.5 trillion sitting in private equity and dry powder ready for acquisitions. I know a lot of them are looking to restructure a little bit of their portfolios. What should companies be thinking about, in light of the pandemic, if they're even contemplating any of these options?
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely right, Chris. I mean, the capital are highly active today. If you're in some of these end markets that are performing well, private equity has that capital on their balance sheet. A number of strategics have a lot of cash on their balance sheet. And so there's strong investor interest, strong valuations. Essentially, none of that has changed here in a COVID environment. It's just shifted in terms of the end markets of focus. If you're in an end market that is challenging, private equity is going to be a more difficult route than going the strategic route. There's more opportunity for upside if a strategic acquisition is available to be made, and we've seen private equity be a little bit more choosy on their spots, willing to deploy capital at good value, very good valuations in the right spots. Again, because they have to get that money, that 1.5 trillion to work. But things that companies can do to be prepared for these types of discussions, this is a process. It's not decided overnight. And so there's a lot you can do. And if you've been thinking about this for 10 years and plan to think for 10 more years, and continue to evaluate growth opportunities available to you, document those strategies to employ that strategy and achieve that future growth. To deepen your bench, if you haven't already, make sure you have 2 or 4 additional senior managers that can step in for you when and if it's time for an ownership transition. 3, know your market value and your enterprise value, how the market values your business and the activity within. It could be a very good time to go to market. It could be a very poor time and better to focus. And then lastly, I really appreciated the question earlier on, Chris, on data availability, and Mike, your comments were just outstanding there. Here you have your not. Readily organized and available, and investors and buyers are going to perceive less risk, and that's going to help you achieve a better outcome.
Yeah, thanks, James. You broke up a little bit there, but I'll fill in the part I think the audience might have missed, which is around the data. And that's a great point, because there's going to be diligence around any type of transaction, and changes in data rarely ever increase the valuation of your business. It almost always has a negative impact. So making sure that you've got that in good order is really, really smart. Mike, did you want to add something onto that?
Yeah, Chris, and a real life example, a great company looking to sell now, it's in process. The accounting had a couple prior period adjustments, meaning revenue moving between years, and it became a huge issue, because the issue is not just that there was an adjustment made, but what else are we missing? So I think there's a lot of internal cleanup that needs to be done before you consider going out to the market. And because you want to make sure that you know where the gaps are before the potential buyer. And they'll typically have, due diligence firms, law firms, accounting firms, and so forth. So you really have to get your act in order before you're ready to go out to the market. Otherwise, I think in this environment, potential buyers may just move on if everything isn't in pretty good shape.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And we're going to have the last session in our series is really going to be focused on this one topic, which is how do you plan for an exit transition? It's understanding the buyers, how they're going to value the company, and then doing kind of a gap analysis as far as how do you compare today to where the best valuation would be down the road, and then how do you fill in those gaps in between. So thank you on that. So we're going to move into our last polling question here, and kind of the last question for the panelists, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A also for the attendees here. The polling question is, have you made significant changes in the way you're managing cash during the pandemic? And what we're really trying to get a sense for here is, how has that really worked for you? Have you been able to get buy-in internally? Have you been able to get buy-in from customers? And what I'm going to ask the panelists here is that, once, management determines that changes are needed to be made related to cash flows, what are the best practices to get buy-in, from the way the company's traditionally done things? I know there's a lot of pushback from employees a lot of times every time you're cutting costs. And then, the second part to that would be, how do you really get buy-in from your vendors and from your customers too? And I know this was touched on a little bit early on, and I think there's a lot of kind of preconceived conceptions around how different people are going to take this. But maybe I'll ask Mike and John to take the first shot at this. So John, it looks like Mike's already unmuted, so we'll let him get started here on that.
Chris, I think there's two things. One is if you have to cut your costs with your employees, the first cost you should cut is your own compensation. Because to get employees on board that we're cutting costs or even cutting salaries, which a lot of people are having to do because of reduced revenue. If you're leading it, then they will follow and be part, for the most part, of making the tough decisions you need to make. The second is on your outside parties and your vendors. And there's almost, there's two things. One is your fixed cost vendors, and there's no such thing as fixed cost anymore. Rent used to be fixed cost, but we're seeing a lot of our clients go to their landlords and renegotiate rent. And they do it by sharing their information and being transparent. And that's the same thing with your variable cost vendors, which is inventory and so forth, and asking them for terms and asking them for extensions and so forth. If you're transparent and it doesn't look like you're just trying to get them to, pull something over on them, they'll generally go along with you. Maybe not for a year or two, but to help you through the next, we talked about the next downturn of the W recovery, which may be 6 months, but they'll work with you if you're transparent and you're honest, and even sharing your financials of why you need to make some changes. So it's basically about integrity and about transparency and about sharing information that people will help you, both your customers and your employees.
Okay, John, did you want to add some commentary onto that?
Yes, as far as getting buy-in throughout your organization, I completely agree with Michael. Transparency, be open and honest with your staff as why it's so important to get this information accurately and timely. Maybe give them an education if you haven't already on the process, what you're going through with your cash flow, why do you need this, so on and so forth. And as far as your vendors, once again, I agree, just be open and honest, say, look, this has been hard for us, we don't need this forever, we need help now, but not 10 years from now, we just need a little help now getting through this to make it through. And as far as the owners, leading the way with taking a cut in compensation, that definitely goes a long way with employees. If they see you're doing that as an owner, then, and the upper management and so on and so forth, it makes it a little bit easier. Doesn't make it easy, but it makes it a little bit easier than if you just say you're taking a cut, I'm not, and that's how we're going to save the company. That's hard. That's a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah, I think that taking a little bit from the last session that we did, a week ago. I thought there were some really good comments around engagement. And I think right now, there's with the pandemic, there's a lot around how you're cutting costs, making sure that safety remains a priority so that people feel like they're in a good spot. So that would be, one of the things to really be thinking about and communicating as you're going through this is that, you're not going to cut, the safety issues. You care about the employees and you're going to make sure that they're taken care of. So I think that's, something to really think about. And maybe another question I'll pose to, any of the panelists here is that, there's a lot of adjustments that have been made when you look at travel and entertainment and a lot of things. How do you see companies kind of re-envisioning that as we emerge from the pandemic? And do you think that's going to result in, real long-term changes for companies when they assess, not just some of the travel, but, the amount of space that they need and other things? And so how are companies, approaching that today?
Chris, let me add some just from the real estate side, because I've had this over the weekend. A lot of the large companies are now realizing they can work from home. And at least in our city, San Francisco, the amount of real estate or office that's up for sublease is enormous. And just 8 or 9 months ago, we had a very tight real estate market. So I think there's going to be dramatic changes, the amount of real estate and office needed. And we're already seeing said huge movements, I think up to 15% to 20% of the office space that's going to be put on the market for sublease, which is really hard to sublease space when nobody is taking any. So I see a fundamental change happening. At first, it wasn't really a fundamental change. It was just people working at home because we all thought this was going to be over in 2 weeks or 4 weeks. But now as this gets extended, to me, it's a permanent change in how we use office space and how we have people work from home.
And John, have you seen anything in any of the restructuring projects that you're looking at that companies can, take away as far as ways to re-envision kind of their business model and how to look at the business going forward?
Yes, when you begin speaking to companies about restructuring, and you're bringing up a lot of foreign ideas that they're not used to hearing, but everybody's generally pretty receptive to it because everybody wants to, of course, improve their business, keep a hold of it, or at least be able to sell it for what it's worth. Out in the market and to the owners, but most often they're glad to get the help because they can keep all of their employees, or at least the majority of them, because with the size of businesses I typically deal with, they have developed this with their employees, and they're somewhat become part of their family. Even if there is, 100 employees, they do worry about them. So they like receiving, a new insight into how they're doing their business.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we did have just a couple of questions that came in from the audience, and one of them I'm not sure we're going to be able to answer specifically here, because this is a fairly specific sector. It has to do with automotive and companies that are, looks like selling both. Well, the question was specific around used cars because there has been some pricing pressure on cars and boats and lots of things that people are probably using in a different way now than they did before, but. Any thoughts on how companies could think about, and this was specific to used car inventory, financing that, over the next 6 months that, might be out there, that just ideas that you might have around that?
Well, I can give you a personal story, Chris. I had Carvana stock. I sold it at 35. And because of COVID, it's gone to well over 200. So I think COVID's been affecting positively the used car market. No one's really looking forward to going on public transit anymore. May put more people on the road, but I know that the used car market is extremely strong now. The new car market is coming back, certainly. But that's a great area, or an interesting area about how COVID, and you really didn't think about it, had a profound effect on an industry. So we all know about Zoom and Amazon, but the used car industry has, from what I've seen, just taken off, and cars are selling very, very quickly. In terms of financing, now, I think, again, it's getting back to, if you have good credit, then you're going to get, you can get financing on the car, and up to whatever the high percent is. It's almost like it's pretty cheap money. So, yeah, I think it's been pretty positive for that industry.
Okay, yeah, thanks. And what we can do is we can also get back to you because we've got some folks in the firm that just focus 100% on automotive. It is one of our larger industry sectors. So if you want to follow me, directly after the call, I can get you in contact with one of those folks that does have a lot of relationships with different banks, because there are banks that specialize in financing automotive versus other inventory items, because it is a little bit different on there. So we've got about a little over 5 minutes left. So I think at this point, maybe I'll open it up to the panelists to just kind of, if you've got any closing comments or bits of advice for the people on the call today to be thinking about as they look forward over the next, because it's not just COVID, we could have changes in tax law and other things that are still really uncertain right now. But a lot of these practices, I think, kind of help you regardless of, what's being thrown at you down the road. So, it looks like a couple people are unmuted. So, John, do you want to start, and then maybe we'll work to Michael and then finish off with James?
Yes, I'll make this very brief. Just because of the segment that I'm in, on the restructuring, I can't stress enough developing a cash flow projection, and it's a continual process of making it more and more and more accurate. It's an invaluable tool, especially in times like this. And even when things are growing great and you're flush with cash, it is still a great idea to have that. Just to know where you sit and where you may sit in, 6, 8, 10, 13 weeks. I can't stress it enough.
Yeah, Chris, I was going to add, I think, always have a saying, hope for the best, expect the worst, and you're never disappointed. And I think that the next 9 to 12 months are going to be challenging, unless there's another real, very, very large stimulus bill and more PPP, which really mitigated the first part of the downturn. So I think it's, agreeing with John, I think it's really would be advisable to be prepared for continuing downturn. Things look good last week on GDP, but I think that's momentary. I also think that it's important to put together a short-term strategic plan. Most companies have strategic plans. Most never complete them or implement them. But clearly, if you were positioned in March and put together a strategic plan and kind of knew how this thing was going to go out, you did pretty well. And you can move, as James said, into adjacencies and business expansions and so forth. So I would say be prepared for, and not to be negative, but be prepared for some rough times before we get beyond this. And also put together something around a plan, both in terms of costs, but also in terms of expansion and moving into adjacencies. I mean, just an example is Etsy. Everyone knows what Etsy is. I think I saw last announcement they're now making a third of their net income because they're selling COVID masks. And it's a natural product to get into, and obviously well positioned for where we are. So that would be two things: manage your costs, expand your business.
Okay.
And only piece I'd add, great comments, Mike and John, is just know your options from the financing perspectives in your different segment that you're focused on. There's out there, some might not be a fit, but again, it's worth knowing what's out there again in your particular segment.
And I guess the one thing I'd add in there is that I think that's a great comment on the strategic plan. I think a lot of companies have a general plan and certain people know about it, but I think in times where you're really challenged, from a business or people or any type of a standpoint, having a very specific plan that is communicated throughout the organization. So everybody knows what the priorities of the business are and everyone's focused on the same thing. Everyone understands why the company is doing what they're doing, and that they feel a part of it. I think that's really important, and that communication stays consistent. And you continually, as John mentioned, monitor how you're performing against that plan, and that you make changes immediately when you see that it's not going the way that you want, or if it's going even better, then maybe you realign resources to really capitalize on some of those opportunities that have come up. So having it focused, everyone on the same page and understanding it is really important in times of uncertainty. So we're nearing the end of our hour here, so I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time to participate on this call, and remind you that we do have the other sessions coming up over the next few weeks here, and I think those will be really good content. There is going to kind of get outside the finance zone for a little bit as we talk about a little bit around digital transformation, talk a little bit more about kind of the procurement and how do you get your products, and then finishing up with that really longer term look at building value in your business and planning for an exit at some point down the road. The more time you have there, the better. So that's something that there's huge dollars that can be translated into value if you've got a long view of how you're going to build value for an exit transaction. So again, thank you everyone for tuning in, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you all on the next one, which is next week. All right, thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Chris.
Thank you.